we could just focus on the book, and then maybe in another chat today or next another time we could go into other things, you know?
Sure, I don't mind if we have to reload and start over again, that's
Well,
fine.
I'm a Zoom novice. I know you're like a kind of an old hand at this, but I'm like
Well,
a
no,
FaceTimer. So
I've used Zoom a few times now. It's my main way of connecting with people since COVID began. So,
yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
but I need Mark to help me get it so
He's your.
that,
At least you've got an engineer. I need one. Can I have a
yeah,
Mark?
he has, everybody wants him.
Yeah, I bet. Well, listen, Jack, it's great to finally get you, and I love, and you've got a bit of Paris, a French sort of Olympic style. I don't
Yes,
know, yeah,
yes,
or
I
beatnik.
can wait I can be a waiter on the Champs-Élysées.
Well, thank you so much for sending me, the copy of the book and the digital copy of it, and for
Sure,
letting me have a quote there. And I was thrilled to read
right.
it. And
This is the one you're talking about.
yes, get that plug in.
Dueling
Let's
Photographers. That's George and one of his models.
yes,
And of course, George always suffered from being uh, second fiddle to Robert when
right.
George didn't want to play second fiddle to
I
anybody.
bet. I bet. Well, thank you for opening up the world of George Dureau to me and many other people who are just familiar with Robert Mapplethorpe's story. And I had been a bit conscious of George Dureau just through interest in history of photography, but really not much.
Hmm.
So, I mean, they were both great friends of yours.
Right.
At least one of them was a lover, and
Yes.
you know,
Robert, not George.
right? No, and why now though, Jack? Why did you feel it was kind of pertinent now to bring George? Because George's voice is so central to your book. It's we know so much about Robert. It's almost in danger of turning into myth. But you bring both of their personalities alive because you knew them both well. And so why now? Why George and Robert now?
Well, as you know, for 60 years, I've been writing gay history and keeping track in my gay archive of all kinds of things. And years ago, I knew that there were a lot of people that needed keeping track of. And if I didn't do that, I would lose track of them. And drummer gave me a centrality of meeting people.
Yeah,
So that's always in the background, people meeting me because of drummer and then we hitting it off. That's how it happened. But I wanted to focus on George because enough time had passed uh, keening for Robert that I thought that it was time to bring George out of the shadows, out of
yeah,
the wings of the Mapplethorpe play, and show how George was an independent painter and artist on his own long before Robert Mapplethorpe ever even heard of him or he heard of Robert Mapplethorpe.
yes,
So when Robert found George, he began to copy George's style because George gave him and sold him a lot of George's photographs based on George's paintings and drawings. Robert's were never based on paintings and drawings. They were just simply photographs created in his mind. But George's had an organic evolution from drawing to painting, and he brought all that talent and that gay gaze, that painter's eye to his photographs. And Robert really liked that. And so he and Sam kind of used and maybe a little bit abused George in that they based a lot of sourced some of Robert's work on George's, but then that was typical of what Robert did, and that was a good thing. He and Sam collected a lot of antique historic photography from the best photographers and from some, very anonymous photographers who were good. But Robert studied all that, and he had a mind that could look at something and take an instant Polaroid of it in his brain, in his photographic memory, and take that ancient antique photograph and turn it into something, if not modern, postmodern. And that was one of the great gifts that he and Tom of Finland and George and the artist Rex brought to gay art, pornography, is that they took mid-century pornography and turned it into 21st century art.
Yes.
And that's a difficult road to go along, but it's a road we must traverse if we want to see how our underground of gay male art became part of the art mainstream in the world. So George needed to be brought out of the closet and allowed to speak his piece. In fact, the first day I telephoned him on a cold call, I said, "Hello, Mr. Dureau. This is Jack Fritscher." And we started talking. And he said, I said, "I'd like to ask you some questions about Robert." And he said, "Are you writing a book?" And I said, "Yes." And he started talking. And 3 hours later, he stopped talking. It was a wonderful interview. And of course, I recorded that with his permission. And that forms part of the essence of this book. Because in that one phone call and in the subsequent other 3 or 4 phone calls that are transcribed in the book, because these transcriptions in the book give you a complete sense of George, because most of the book is George talking, speaking for himself, about himself, his career, and Robert, and how Robert, he said, shit all over him and other photographers because his reputation got so large.
Mm.
So what I'm trying to do is remove George and anybody else I can out from under the shadow of Robert, who I loved immensely. But and this is nothing against him as a person or as an artist, because he wasn't stealing things, he was educating himself. And art, as Picasso and many others have said, art is theft. Well, he didn't steal George Dureau, but if he saw George's paintings and photographs that featured the model, but with a circle around the model. That came out of George's drawing and painting. Then
Right.
suddenly, Robert was photographing Black models with a circle behind them, which he had never done before. He was also using black walls behind the model, which George, he learned from George, because Robert had always been using white or gray walls behind Black models. In fact, Robert had never shot, so far as anyone knows, George said, a Black man before he saw George's photographs. And then Robert himself began shooting at least visible photographs we could see. He may have shot photographs earlier that nobody has seen in the Mapplethorpe archives, because he left behind 240,000 negatives.
Wow.
George
A
himself left
lot.
behind thousands of negatives
Mm.
as well. So there's an immense treasure trove in both these wonderful artists who liked each other, who were friends, who were kind of frenemies, who were in a tug of war. That's why I kind of pose them as duelists, because
Yeah.
it's suitable for New Orleans and the dueling oaks and all those French things that George is representative of, and Robert wanted to participate in, because Robert wanted to go down to the magical realism of the French Quarter and indulge his appetites in that at the same time that he was meeting models, especially Black models, and was learning how to make his own entry into Black culture enough to be able to draw Black men who would be willing to pose for him out of that background.
And what's
So
extraordinary, what comes through really in the book is this interesting relationship dynamic between, and the difference perhaps is hinted at between the two photographers and their models. This kind
mhm.
of almost lifelong relationship that Giro seemed to build up with models and with their families. He was very close. It was a studio life, wasn't it, that he had in New Orleans?
Yes, he ran a kind of a repertory company of his models who were also his friends, because he even said that he was the big daddy of the French Quarter, because men he'd shot 30 years ago would come back to see him, or bring their grandson or their son to be photographed
Wow. Yeah, I can
because
believe
you
that.
know they knew that George was the big daddy. He was a photographer who liked to photograph men. He didn't push himself or force himself on anybody. He was kind. He
Yes.
followed up. He didn't just throw them out the door when he was done with them, because George liked to bring them back 10 years later and shoot them again so that he could show the clock of time in their face, because George intended with each one of his photographs to tell a story. George's photographs were narratives from a film. Robert's were simply sort of one-off single frames from a film noir that was being created in Robert's head. And Robert, pretty much like most gay photographers in the big cities and in the fast lane, would bring somebody in and photograph them and then would pay them a fair amount, and then they'd go on their way. And but George had follow up. I mean, George would these guys would come back and they'd want jobs, and he'd say, "Well, I can't photograph you anymore. I photographed you too much. But if you want to, the gutters on my house need cleaning. So if you want to do that, I'll hire you to do that." So he'd hire them for odd jobs around the place, cleaning up the studio. In fact, there's a marvelous story in the book where George's brother, Don Dureau, who's also a gay man, said that he woke up one morning and there was a black man named Peanut who cleaned George's studio for him. And at that time, Don Dureau had just left a marriage with with his wife, who was the mother of his children. So he was staying with George, and George said, "You can sleep in the main part of the house," which George had two basic rooms: a large living room and then a large kitchen. So what George did, so that Don could have some privacy, George put a bed in there and then put easels all around the bed so that there was kind of a screen. And in the morning, when Don woke up, he felt something bumping the bed, and it was Peanut cleaning up the place. But one of the paintings was on an easel that George had been working on the night before. And Don looked at the painting and he said, "Well, last night when I was looking at that painting, the painting was looking at me." And he said, "Now the face is turned sideways." And Peanut said, "Well, George gets up early in the morning and he can change things." And then Don goes on about how George liked to work in oil because while it was still fresh, you could move it around and change anything. And that's why George liked painting, because it was a creative art, whereas he said that photography was an editorial art. So he thought that painting was a tiny bit more creative than photography, because he thought by editorial art, he meant that you could turn the camera on somebody you were painting, and the camera would take everything that was in the frame. You couldn't tell the camera, when you're painting, you have to know how to paint somebody's fingers. But when you're shooting with the camera takes in everything. And he said, you have to learn how to edit that frame. And he said that's what the main difference between him and Robert is. George edited in the camera. He never afterwards sat down and edited his frames. And he said that Robert sat down and edited his frames, which made his frames better, but they weren't the original frame. It was always Robert sitting afterwards doing more artwork on it.
Which is the
Because
kind of classic photographer's way of doing things, isn't it? I mean,
right,
William
right.
Eccleston always used to say, only take one picture of anything, because otherwise it's a nightmare of editing. And I agree with that. But
Yes, it is.
I think really, it's interesting what comes across in your book is that George's painterliness and his background in painting, because he came a little late to photography, didn't he? Really does inform his photography. I mean, I'm thinking of those beautiful pictures. There's one I think that I like of Ernest Beasley, I think his name was, because he always names his models as well, the full
Hmm.
name usually, doesn't he? Unlike Robert. Um,
Right,
but yeah, but it's this kind of there's this very gorgeous kind of black and white, light and shade, the contrast, and there's a real painterliness to that. So it's interesting to hear what you say about him making it first and getting it right in the camera.
right. Well, George famously said, "The camera is a mindless lunatic." I
True.
I said, "George, I'm going to quote you on that. The camera is a mindless lunatic."
That should
And
be a title for your next book.
I know, well, I mean, it was when he said it in 1990, but now with cameras everywhere, there couldn't be more lunacy
Yeah.
afoot than all the millions, the gazillions of pictures taken now, some of which are brilliant,
Oh yeah. I mean,
because you can do a lot with a camera.
yes, democracy, photography finally did get totally democratic, and that's got great pluses and great minuses. But at the end of the day, it's a beautiful thing that everybody can make images of their lives, and
Right,
they're the best people to do it.
right. Well, George was very grounded. Of course, he had studied art at Tulane and at a university in Louisiana, and he had studied the history of art in college and then on his own. I mean, Don said that when George painted, he had next to him books on Greek and Roman art with statues, Roman statues of nude athletes and draped women. And he would have those off to the left while he was painting. And Robert, on the other hand, had his own tutorial with Sam at 1 Fifth Avenue, where Sam
We
had
should mention when you say Sam, it's Sam Wagstaff, who
Sam Wagstaff, right, who was
for
Robert's.
movies. Yeah,
Yeah, he was 25 years older than Robert. They were born on the same day, and George and Sam met Robert around 1971. And it was around 1971 that George Dureau picked up the camera for the first time. So he was 41 in 1971. He said, "I knew nothing about cameras, but I knew what art was, and I knew what a vision was." So he was inspired, and what impelled him in 1981 was that the photographer Belloc, who in 1910 in New Orleans had shot a lot of women in the red light district, black women in the red light district.
I've
Yes,
got Belloc
that's
written down. E.J. Belloc, right?
E.J. Belloc, right?
Yeah.
And the movie Pretty Baby was made about E.J. Belloc. And E.J. Belloc shot women of the streets the same way that George shot men of the streets. And Robert also went out cruising the streets for his leather models and for his black models. So the street played an important part for both photographers. But well, Robert was picked out uh, in several books and kind of named like the ultimate New Yorker for the way he came to New York, got off the bus like a 42nd Street musical, cruised and hustled on 42nd Street and Times Square, worked his way through Art and Pratt and got into cameras, and then met Sam. Uh,
Hello? You frozen there, Jack. Are you still with me? Hello? This is going so well.
of
Hi,
all their
are you there?
lives. Pardon me?
Go, yeah, go ahead, Jack. So you froze for a moment, but it's
Oh,
okay. You're alive and kicking. Keep going.
okay. Uh, Most people think that George and Robert maybe shot black men all their entire careers. The truth is that they both shot between roughly 1970 and 1988. Both of them stopped shooting black men then. Robert, because he was dying of AIDS, and George, because Don said, "I've shot everything I can. I don't need any more. I'm going back to painting. The camera gives me too much. I need to have more of myself in it so that I can bring out the person I'm photographing, because my photographs, like my paintings, are about the subject in the photograph. And I'm more concerned about what my subject thinks of the photograph than I am what any potential buyer might think." And he said Robert, on the other hand, was always concerned about what the buyer would think rather than what the subject would think. That's why George on his photographs will sign them with his name, but he also have the model sign
Yes,
the photograph with his full name,
and
whereas
the full
Robert might
name.
just have Mr. 10.5 inches,
Right.
or polyester. So there was that difference, but that was the difference between New York and New Orleans, because George was the king of New Orleans the way that Robert was king of New York.
Yeah,
And
it's
George
an
said,
interesting.
I may not sell at New York prices, but I sell at New Orleans prices, and my work gets out there where it needs to be, and I can live just fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's this idea that in a way he wasn't as competitive as perhaps Mapplethorpe was. I mean, you refer to your great friend, your lover, Robert, as well, in the 70s, as being a sweet guy. It's the word that you most commonly use
Yes.
in other books and interviews as well, Jack. And I wondered, with that bearing that in mind, and he does come across by all, the way Patti Smith talks about him. They were very much star-crossed lovers before he went
Hmm.
into relationships with men. But I guess it was at the same time that he met early on Sam in that decade. But tell us about the time, perhaps that you first met Robert, because I first met you through a photograph of Robert by Leonard Fink, and who has,
Yeah.
by the so you're in his archive at Negatives, which is now at the LGBT Center in New York. They have his archive, and it was great. But you spotted yourself because you spotted your boots. So, and
Well,
there you
my
were cruising with Robert Mapplethorpe. It was fantastic.
yes, we were out in front of the Ramrod, and we were talking to Elliot Siegel, and Elliot Siegel was the manager of the St. Mark's Baths, and I Elliot was a friend of mine. He did not know Robert. Robert did not know him, but I introduced them because when Robert showed up at my desk at Drummer, he didn't come to my desk at Drummer because I'm Jack Fritscher. He didn't know who I was, but he came to the desk because it was the editor's desk at Drummer, and I was the editor. He showed up at my desk and came in and unzipped his big black portfolio, and out came this cum shot of just beautiful photographs. And this was the 70s, and Drummer was a hungry magazine that came out every 30 days, and we had to fill it. But in the
You needed
70s,
new talent, right? You needed new talent every month.
oh, you needed talent like him every month. Yes, because
Yeah.
Drummer was very much of a reader created magazine. We didn't go after professional uh, writers and photographers and artists. We went by, sort of for more leather folk art. And that even extends to people like Tom of Finland or Rex, and now Robert Mapplethorpe coming to the fore, because in 1977, in March 1977, when Robert came to my desk, he could not get arrested in New York. Like Rex in New York, Robert was persona non grata because there were so many people jealous of him who could only see his focus on creating his career, creating his art, and not letting anything get in the way of it. I adored that discipline
Yes.
because that discipline, for instance, grew his career, helped me fill Drummer because other photographers and artists and writers who could have been helping Phil Drummer in the 70s weren't, because they had excuses like, I can't afford paints. There's not enough light in my studio. I can't afford film. Basically, the reason was they were all out fucking 24/7. And many an art career was taken up in that. That's fine because that was a free choice, but it didn't help Phil Drummer, and it didn't help create their body of work in the 70s. A lot of those people only came out then in the 80s. What surprises me so much when people are now being nostalgic about the past, they go back to like the 1990s. And
Which is great for me because I took a lot of pictures in the 1990s and about,
well,
and now
your
they're getting
time will come.
published. Now they're getting published and they're being put in shows, So it's nice to see that I've spent a little bit of my misspent youth pointing my
Right.
camera in the right direction.
Well, see, this is short-term nostalgia that's getting you, but
Yeah.
long-term nostalgia goes back to Robert.
Oh yeah.
So it's
Jack,
this
it's saying
this
we're running out of time, but I think we've got just under 10 minutes, so we're good for a little bit. And then we can start again if you want. Do you want to do
that's
that?
hmm
How do you feel about that? For like another
it's, fi-
20 minutes or
it's
something?
fine with me. I'm good with
Yeah,
that.
cool. Okay. Well, we've got like 9.5 minutes on this. And then I'll maybe
Well, let's
chop
just
them
keep
together.
going. Let's just keep going till it stops, and then we'll start
Yeah.
again.
Okay.
Like Judy
Yeah.
said, we'll stay here all night and we'll sing them all.
Don't blame her for everything. She's got enough trouble.
I know
Stonewall,
she made
you know?
everybody gay. On her
Yeah.
manas, she carried our sins on her manazon shoulders.
Well, I'll let you into a little secret. I always fancied Margaret Hamilton more anyway when I was growing up. So I don't know what that says about me as a 4-year-old, but there we
You
are.
thought the movie was about her, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was about the dog.
Oh yeah. Bless Toto. And but this is the latest in a series about Robert Mapplethorpe by you or featuring Robert. And
Right.
uh, we could talk a little bit about um, assault with a deadly weapon, deadly camera,
Hmm.
which was that really the first biographical book that you did about Robert?
Yes, Assault with a Deadly Camera,
Yeah,
Mapplethorpe Assault with a Deadly Camera in 1994 was the first book I wrote on Robert. And in fact, it was the first book that was both a memoir, quasi bio. Mine was really a pop culture memoir, not a biography. Uh, and it was kind of like the first book out on Robert because 1994 was only 4 years after he passed. And I started working on it in 1990. Uh, in 1989, even because when he died in March of 1989, by October, it took that long to get it produced. I had an obituary for Robert. There was a major article in Drummer magazine in October of 1990 or 1989. And then somebody at the New York Times in New York saw that because, the crossover between the overground and the leather underground is everywhere. And he put me in contact with a publisher. So that publisher was very interested in doing a book on Mapplethorpe because Robert was so fresh, but also because Robert had just passed. I've been studying and been a professor in university, teaching and studying popular culture since 1968, when I helped found the American Popular Culture Association, and I made sure that there was a gay plank in that platform. So when Robert died, I was very aware that we shouldn't let much time go by. History can tell its story from the future, but I wanted to catch everybody while they were red hot and still had fresh memories of Robert. We're still grieving Robert before the stories got too good, if you know what I mean, that they
yeah,
became boilerplate that people told all the time. So that's why after the drummer article came out, I began interviewing people, other photographers, particularly about Robert. And George Dureau was the first one I turned to because as his mentor, I thought that was a good place to begin. And nobody had yet asked George ever anything about Robert. And so Assault with a Deadly Camera is basically just like Dueling Photographers. It's basically a book of interviews with photographers who knew Robert, with gallery owners like Holly Solomon who knew Robert, with critics like Edward Lucy Smith who knew Robert. So I got firsthand eyewitness history, oral history from people who knew the man, like me.
yeah.
While
Now
other
this is the
people
key.
were,
This is just to say, Jack. This is a key word with you. This phrase, eyewitness. I mean, you use it yourself a lot, but it's really kind of a potent theme of the way you tell these stories because you were there. I mean, you
mm,
knew them, and
well,
you know
he
you were.
asked me to write about him too.
Yes. Did he?
He asked everybody he knew to write about him, whether it's Patti Smith or Edmund White. He asked me, we were working on a book together.
Yeah.
I first published him in Drummer in 1978. I gave him a cover in 1978. So I'd been working with him and collaborating with him for years, ever before that book came out. So that's why I thought the eyewitness was a key thing to it.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's great to see that both their stories come through. And it's interesting to me as a photographer, just as somebody also interested in the history of photography and this kind of lineage. I'm glad you brought up EJ. Is it Belloc? because
Hmm.
you talk in the book, or you know, Dureau talks about this kind of lineage, this influence. It's because of course it wasn't just um, um, Robert being influenced by Dureau, but photographers can be like that, especially gay photographers. They can be quite offish with each other. Being pretending to be friends, but being kind of more like frenemies, as you put it. And but I think there's also a healthy kind of love affair between gay photographers too, whether they like each other or not, maybe personal politics aside. But if they have a similar theme, then they will pick and choose, elements that kind of suit whatever the other person is doing, And it's also interesting that you talk about Sam Wagstaff kind of encouraging Robert to find certain elements in a Dureau that might suit him, because of course Robert's style was so much more slicker and studied. It was, if I think of Dureau, I think of the 70s. There's an earthiness. There's
Hmm.
a kind of a humanity there that kind of Robert distills into this slick studio of masks and mirrors that we spoke about before.
Hmm.
And I just think it's really great that Dureau's voice comes through in your book, because he is really pivotal in inspiring and encouraging Mapplethorpe. Uh, because Mapplethorpe's suddenly might become a huge myth if we're not careful, Jack. We have to bring him down to earth sometimes, right?
Well, everybody tries to make him mythological, but also a lot of people try to make him a villain, but he wasn't a villain. He was a nice, sweet man.
Yeah,
People liked him. People loved him. I mean, look at all the people who fell in love with him. That wasn't about anything, but it might have been sex. It might have been love. It might have been lust. But I know I had genuine affection and love for him
yeah.
as a friend, even after we were no longer, lovers. But it evolved into friendship. And uh, but I think trying to it only time, even though we like to get things red hot from eyewitnesses, only time will sort out what's the important stuff and what's. I just want to make sure that when time looks at this, that there are paragraphs here and there from a whole bunch of different eyes who laid eyes on Robert. I mean, some when you look on Facebook these days, I first saw Robert and came aware of him in 1990. Well, wonderful. That was when the height of that horrible trial in Cincinnati, that witch trial that put, can you imagine, photographs on trial for being obscene. They were all declared innocent and didn't have to go to prison. But, it was the best free publicity that a career could have had. Unfortunately, Robert didn't live to see that because Jesse Helms did not attack him on the floor of the US Senate until 100 days after Robert died. And it was at that time, 100 days after Robert died, that the whole uh, clash and censorship happened at the Corcoran about his show, about government money being used for these filthy faggot photographs.
Well,
You know,
listen,
when you
that's
hear,
yeah, yeah. Just to see, we've got less than a minute, Jack. So those filthy faggot photographs. Yes, that's a good place to end part one.
okay,
Okay. So
all
what do
right,
I do? I'm going to press end because it'll cut us off, and then I'll send you another. Do I send you another link?
sure,
I think I have to restart it. So do you want to do?
okay, yeah, that's
You happy
fine.
to do that for 20
Yep,
minutes or so? I want to have a
for
chat, a little bit more chatty with you.
okay,
Okay, I'll see
all
you in a
right,
minute.
all right, in a minute.
I don't want to be. The phone is enough for me. I'm an old-fashioned analog boy, right? In a in a digital world.
We're all analog boys trying to make it in a digital world.
Well, I know, right?
If our devices don't explode in our pants.
Oh God, that's something else, wasn't it? Gosh, yeah, another kind of extremity of horrors of war. Jack
Mm-hmm.
Fritscher, welcome. What do we say? We say good morning, good afternoon, California, London calling. So
London calling.
this is part two for our friends joining us. Not now because we're not going live. We're not that theatrical, but I will be posting it with the first part if you're happy, and I'll send you it first. But Jack, let's go ahead because there's some things I'd like to talk to you about, I think would be a great interest to your followers and to people of LGBT history, of, writing history and writing now alive, as well as what we discussed in part one, which was all about
Hmm.
your new book, Dueling Photographers, George Dureau and Robert Mapplethorpe. Have I got the names the wrong way around?
Yes, you have the names correct.
Okay, good. Because it's really George's voice in that. And you spoke extensively a little bit, really, about that and very well. And I think that was of great interest to people. But I thought we'd go back in time a bit, if you'd like to. And I was really interested looking you up and reading about you and listening to some of the interviews you've done in the past about growing up in Chicago and Peoria and the the social work that you did in the 1950s, early 60s, I think,
Hmm.
with Saul
Alinsky,
Lewinsky. My apologies. Sa-
Saul Alinsky, the great
yeah,
labor organizer. Yeah.
yeah, who I was not aware of, but I read up a little bit about him through
Yeah,
you.
he's great.
He said, what are your memories of that time, Jack? Because that really seems to informed your social awareness, your writing, didn't it? To come.
Yes, it did, because growing up as a war baby, you have to remember that everybody in the gay bars in the 1970s was a war baby. We were all born before the war or during the war or just after. So if you were born in 1945, at the end of the war, you were 30 in 1975. So the population in gay bars in the 70s were all war babies who had suffered the trauma of that time. And then coming out of the war and that trauma, we had to put up with the 50s, the 1950s, which was the most dangerous decade in America to be gay, because it was run by the government seeking the lavender queers who were in government, denounced by the HUAC, the House Un-American Activities. The Red Scare, looking for communists, became the Lavender Scare. So as a teenager, I and people my age grew up with the fear that we had to keep quiet because we could be arrested, we could be uh, put into mental institutions simply for being gay, and then horrible things could have been done to us there with electroshock and isolation and all of that. In fact, as a teenager, I used to drive by when I first got my driver's license. I drove by the local insane asylum because I thought, well, I got to take a look at it in case I ever get caught and get thrown in there. How do I get out of it? So all of us, Robert Mapplethorpe, myself, had that in common, growing up with that attack on us as being an unworthy part of society. And so identifying as being an underclass, it was logical that we would join in the social work being done in the 1960s around Black civil rights, because Black civil rights for all the gay white people, gay white boys who were involved in those uh, demonstrations and marches, it was a parallax movement to the gay movement. While we were marching for Black civil rights, behind it all, the men marching were marching for gay civil rights, and the women marching were marching for women's rights. But those were subtextual till early and mid 60s, and then came out more as all the movements, the anti-war movement, the free sex movement, the women's movement, the gay movement, all merged by the end of the 60s, blowing up at the horrible 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, where the Chicago police uh, created police riots daily that went on for 3 days in the streets of Chicago. And that lit the fuse on Stonewall, because Stonewall occurred a mere 10 months later, with all the people who were motivated to resist the cops in New York grew out of the resistance to the cops in Chicago. All these things with other previous gay uprisings coalesced so that Stonewall could happen. And I think that for myself, for Robert Mapplethorpe, for all gay men, that what Tennessee Williams said about himself applies to all of us. our deviance made us kinder, more socially aware, more social justice warriors than we would have been if we weren't basically labeled as deviants. And so we create our deviant art, our alternative art, out of this childhood of war, this teenage years of being threatened with arrest and defamation by the government, and then the swinging 60s when everybody came out of the closet and coalesced into a group that led to the liberation of the 1970s, because Stonewall was like a glitter bomb that exploded. And everybody that came out of that night went into the 1970s. And the 1970s, I call the Titanic 70s. It was like a first class party, cruising on full speed ahead, having a wonderful time until in 1981, it hit the iceberg of HIV. So we have about a 12-year period between Stonewall and HIV in 1981, which was also basically the same window between the invention of penicillin that made gay diseases, quote, go away,
Mhm.
so that you could basically fuck freely in the 1970s without all the fear of what people have today, legitimately so, from all the viruses going around. And I would like to caution people, because I read on Facebook when people post things about the past, they make all these well-intentioned comments when they say, oh, whatever happened to what this porn star from the 1970s, or this writer, or this person, or my friend, everybody died. Well, newsflash, everybody didn't die. I'm sorry for everybody that did, and I mourn them because I lost a Rolodex of 100 more plus people. And it's not to take anything away from them, but there's a million of us that survived.
Yes.
And in us lies the story of that past. And we must speak out so that the ones who did die of AIDS and of sexual violence against them can be kept alive through the writing and the talking and the photography and the art that all of us do these days, trying to recall what that strange country of the past was like.
Yes, and
Bec
just to say, just to interject briefly, Jack, there's a common thread here that I've been talking about with a curator this week. I mentioned to you about this Lee Bowery show that's happening, a big show for him at Tate Modern next year. And so
Mhm.
there are many contributors. I was one of just many photographers, and so it's
Yes.
nice to be connected to that. But I happened to take those last images of him before he did die of AIDS, about a
Hmm.
month later. And so they're a bit of bone of contention. They're not great pictures, but they just happen to be a document of that moment. And I feel kind of honor bound, although he wasn't a friend of mine really. I was just a photographer passing through his story. But he trusted me enough to want to take those pictures at
Hmm.
a vulnerable moment. And I kind of feel duty bound to be part of that story and put my best foot forward, even if I didn't at the time. So
Yes, well, you should be,
photography can help us. We have these archives, Jack, and I know you have a great one.
well, you should be congratulated on those Lee Bowery pictures. Every picture doesn't have to be a formal portrait by Robert Mapplethorpe or Arthur Tress. Uh, as we were joking, we analog boys living in a digital age. I just yesterday ordered a piece of AI software where I could take sort of my blurry photographs taken late at night in a sex romp and now crisp them up, bring them into focus so even more can come out of our past. I've always saved all my
That's
negatives,
interesting.
even the bad ones. I've got a
Yeah.
million more negatives than that the good ones I've already got, but there's a million other ones that can still be processed with AI.
Yeah.
And through that, it's like uh, taking the dirt off of the Mona Lisa, and then the Mona Lisa reveals itself.
You're
The
taking some
AI,
varnish away.
the
Yeah.
AI takes the smudge off the picture, off the photograph, and reveals the photograph of what we caught historically in that moment. And that act of capture is the art. The fact that you were there as a participatory new journalist photographer, catching the history as it happened. And
It's very important to you, this recurring theme of being an eyewitness, isn't it? But I love this idea that you're doing something new with your old pictures.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, I can write 1,000 words, but one picture is worth those 1,000 words, particularly if it proves the point I'm making. Because I can write about a whole group of us from Drummer and Mapplethorpe and Tom of Finland and all of us going out to dinner. But, somebody might say, really? How could anybody have known all these people?
I
So the
know.
picture proves that. Not that we need to prove it, but it's just that it's nice to have that proof so people can see that you were an eyewitness and the camera was an eyewitness of all these people knowing each other.
Yes.
And out of that knowing each other back then came a strength and a solidarity that continues with those of us who survive, who must carry the stories of George and Dureau and Robert Mapplethorpe and so many others forward.
It's interesting that recently, with your other writing, you talked about, the drummer years, that the other artists, the other photographers that you worked with, writers like Larry Townsend and Robert Opal, who is famous across the world as a streaker at the one of the Oscars, the kind of
Yeah, he was the streaker at the 1974 Oscars. Yes,
74, one of the few people to upstage, I should imagine, Elizabeth Taylor and David Niven, but he
yes, right.
managed to do it.
Yeah,
But he was
a billion people saw him naked. He was
I
the
know
most naked man in the world.
he was the most naked photographer in the world.
And
But
writer and artist. Yes,
right, and you were great friends and collaborators as you were with Wakefield Poole and many others during this kind of halcyon age of drama. And it
right.
seems like and you talk about the Titanic 70s. It's kind of this amazing analogy. But I should mention to our listeners, you've also written a book about the gay people on the Titanic.
Yes, I did. Yes, I
Tell us
wrote
a
a
bit
novel.
about that.
Pardon me?
Tell us a little bit about that book, Jack. That's kind of
Well,
as a
in
concept.
when I was 15 or 16, I saw the movie with the great gay actor Clifton Webb, called A Night to Remember.
I
And
remember, yeah.
it was about the people on the Titanic, the passengers on the Titanic, and what they went through as the ship was going down. And that captured my imagination as a teenager because, uh, let's see, 26, 36, 46, 50. When I was 16, the Titanic had gone down only 40 years before. So people remembered it as history, not as myth necessarily. But by the 1950s, it was becoming mythic. And so that always stuck in my head. And I thought it was a wonderful world in small, in that you could see the whole wide world in the experience of the microcosm of the world on that ship.
Yeah.
All classes represented, some different races, but that didn't show in that movie. And so in the 1980s, when AIDS hit, I was writing for all these gay magazines during that golden age of gay magazines from 1975 until they were all killed by the internet in 1999. So I was writing for a dozen of these gay magazines, and they were always after new material. And I thought that the Titanic was a perfect analog for what was happening with AIDS as our ship went down, because the 70s was our first class party cruising on. Uh, we did not know that that iceberg was out there any more than the people on the Titanic could be blamed for hitting the iceberg. People say, well, why didn't, leather people, for instance, watch out? Why didn't they know what was going to happen? Does anybody ever know what's going to happen?
Do you
You
know? Do you
can't
know
predict.
what? It's exactly. But what you just reminded me of. I was a schoolboy at the time. My mum had a stroke. They sent me away to a boarding school for a couple of years, which is very practical, and it did me a lot of good actually. I
Yeah,
kind
me
of
too.
enjoy. I kind of enjoyed it. And they gave me the key to the art room at the weekend. I didn't get a lot of art done, but I had a lot of fun. And
Sure.
but I remember seeing on the television the adverts, and there was an advert of an iceberg. I don't know whether you whoever saw that the British government's response was to the graphics. I think it was a Saatchi ad actually, and it was a massive iceberg. That it's just the tip. There's all this great kind of looming in this dark waters, and then there was
Oh, the,
a fall of a slab. A kind of a gravestone with AIDS written on it, and then some flowers were thrown on it. And it just,
I've never seen that.
well, I'll maybe send you a link. I mean,
Is that
it
just British? It must have been just a British promo.
British sense of
Public
humor.
public service, yeah.
Well, it was a public service film, essentially.
Right.
It was put out
So
by the Department of Health, but it just
yeah.
terrified young people like me. It was very confusing. It was very ominous. And, it just said death, essentially.
Well, you see, that's why I wrote the book Titanic, uh, because Hollywood did not tell the full story. And I thought by telling the Titanic story in an age of AIDS, I could put a positive spin on how some people managed to survive the Titanic, gay people specifically, because nobody ever told the story of gay people on the Titanic. And I did a year of research actually about everything about the Titanic, from the size of the lifeboats to how many people got in it, to everything about it. In fact, some of the reviews from the Titanic .com sites,
Right.
historical sites, have liked it for its historical accuracy, but have balked at the fact that there's gay sex in it.
Right.
Well, we have a right to tell the I mean, if you figure in the hospitality industry, if in normal population 1 out of 10 people is gay, in the hospitality industry it must be 5 out of 10 people. So out of the 2,600 and some people who died on the Titanic, if 10% of those were gay, that's 260 people.
Yeah.
And their story had never been told. So I imaginated, I didn't imagine, I imaginated their story and put them into it. And I put gay characters in love with each other in first class, then going down at night into the second class, because I had a good friend in London who was a master of the leather scene there, named Felix Jones. And Felix Jones was the center of leather in London in the 50s and 60s and still the early 70s.
Mm.
In fact, I stayed with him when I was in London in 1969. And he had been a purser on the QE1, I
Q,
guess, two,
QE2. Yeah.
yeah, on the QE2. So he was able to tell me a lot about what happened to him as a purser. So I took what he had told me and I created a character called the purser. And so there's a lot of accuracy and intimacy that came out of his mouth about serving as a gay man on a ship that I was able to put into the book. So the book had it was erotic, but it was also erotic art. It's a genuine novel, but it's very sexy. And it was published in 1988, years before James Cameron ever came along with his Titanic, in Hancho. And in Hancho, they serialized it because it's a long, long, long story. And then afterwards, that got published as its own little novella. So it makes for a pleasant several nights reading, depending upon how fast you go while you're masturbating, about being on the Titanic and having fun at a first class meal, and then going down uh, into the furnace area where the stoker, and there's a major hot, grimy character called the stoker, who is one of the principal characters in it. So you have everybody from first class to the stokers to the pursers. It's a cross section of gay culture living inside a straight culture. And when the ship goes down, they have to go down too. But how they save themselves is what we had to do to save ourselves. What is safe sex but jumping into a lifeboat?
Right.
So once we were told, for a while, they didn't even know what safe sex was. And once they discovered safe sex, then we discovered there was a lifeboat on the ship that seemed to be going down.
Sure.
Because after AIDS was announced, it was like 3, maybe 4 years before there was even a test. So for those 36 or 48 tension-filled months, every gay man in the world figured that he had AIDS because everybody seemed to be getting it. Nobody knew how they got it. And until there was a test, you just figured you had it.
And those early
And
years must have been, I mean, they were pretty terrifying as a young gay man, as a young teenage boy, let alone to be active, as you were young adults on the scene and very much participatory. But this analogy that you have with the Titanic is kind of interesting, but it's also very potent. It's kind of intoxicating the way you described it. You know, if you can kind of make it to the end whilst the ship is going down, kind of thing.
Hmm.
You know, but
Right.
it's a thrill ride as well. But it's just very kind of poetic and also arresting analogy with the virus itself and how it was affecting people early on. Because Palm
Hmm.
Drive videos, your acclaimed series of people fulfilling their fantasies, kind of started pretty early on during the AIDS pandemic, didn't it? And it offered seemed to me, looking from a distance and not knowing that much about it, only through you and a little bit from what I've seen online, but it really gave people a bit of space to have fun again and to explore their sexualities and their fantasies in a safe place. Um, when perhaps bars were becoming and the streets and the parks, that kind of sexual encounter was becoming more frightening.
Right. Well, I need to go back a bit to what we spoke of earlier and the fact that I met and knew and hung out with all these very interesting people. I had the good fortune to be the founding San Francisco editor of Drummer. I did not found it in LA, but I helped found it when it moved to San Francisco because it changed from an LA bar magazine into an international leather magazine about masculine gender when it came to San Francisco. And I knew these people because of the centrality of Drummer. They would come to Drummer and I would meet them, and then we would hit it off or not. And most of them were great guys, and we had fun together. And I was able to support them because they came to Drummer wanting the publicity for their art that Drummer could give them because we were publishing 42,000 copies every month. And when you tally that up to 24 years of 214 issues, literally millions of people read Drummer, in which we promoted Tom of Finland, Rex, Robert Mapplethorpe, the Hun, all kinds of artists who are now household names who were not known back then. So having dealt with the art of artists and my own art in Drummer, when AIDS came along, something had happened earlier that cued me in as the editor of Drummer to put a medical column in Drummer. In Drummer, I had told them we're not going to talk about venereal disease ever. This is an entertainment magazine. But there came a point in 1979 when I realized that too many people were sick all the time with amoebiasis and hepatitis. I didn't know what was going on, but a lot of guys were sick this week with that, and the next week somebody was sick with something else. So I got in touch with Dr. Richard Hamilton in San Francisco, who was treating a lot of these guys, and together he talked to me and about the latest disease and what people could do to protect themselves sexually when they were out being promiscuous. And we would write these up as Dr. Dick column in Drummer. So I was onto the health thing in Drummer and publishing the stuff in 78, 79. In 1980, Robert Mapplethorpe and I had our only little lovers quarrel. If it was that, it was just a tiff over hygiene. My California hygiene was shocked at his New York hygiene. And I told him, that I just wasn't sure I could do and go to some of these places that, he wanted to go to. Not that I'm a saint or a virgin queen or anything like that. I just, I saw it because I was, seeing all this stuff come into Drummer. I was watching the population of these cities grow sicker and sicker. And
So there was something very instinctive reaction to what you were seeing because you had a great vantage point in your position at drummer
right.
to see
So
these
I took,
stories.
yeah. So I took what I was doing at Drummer and my thoughts about him, and I realized that I could take people were not in 1981, the VCR came in at the same time as AIDS. So HIV and the VCR arrived at the same time. The HIV drove everybody home. The VCR was at home. And I put it together that I could move Drummer images and messages to the screen, get them on the VCR, because more people were beginning to view than to read. So I thought I'll start Palm Drive Video, and I can take drummer men, get them to act out their fantasies on screen to entertain the people who are smart enough to stay home, to stay safe, while there's no way to know what is safe sex or whether or not you can be, before you could even be tested. So this was to fill that vacuum. And the people who were our fans, and there were many of them, were people who lived in major cities, yes, but a lot of them were guys who had left the big cities and gone back to the towns they came from because of AIDS or because they wanted to go back and take care of their parents who were elderly at that time, because that was part of the burden on that age group of male population. So they were all at home alone with nothing much to view except things like cult movies, which are beautiful movies. But cult movies, like most porn movies of the time, were like watching fish in an aquarium. The cult models swim by back and forth, very beautiful, like beautiful fish, but they never turn and look at you.
Yes, and they're kind of untouchable, aren't they?
They are untouchable. And I wanted our Palm Drive men, I tell them, I want you to look directly into the camera. I want you to speak directly into the camera, because I wanted our movies to have sound, not like cult movies, which are all silent movies. Because recall that the gay movies in the 1970s were basically all silent movies, because sound did not come into gay movies until until the video camera arrived in 1981, when you could collect the ambient sound of the film shoot. So I would get them to look into the camera, to speak into the camera, so that the viewer at home looking at directly into a screen could have eye contact with another man that he identified with because of the leather drummer masculine vibes. And then, as I would say, this movie with one guy on screen is a feature-length film. It lasts like 65, 70, 90 minutes, but it's broken up into sections. So while you're watching it, if you're jerking off and you come, stop. Don't just let it keep going after you've come and waste the footage. Back it up a little bit so the next time you can pick up where you left off. And what happened is that eye-to-eye contact to protect these people protecting themselves at home during AIDS is now the style on YouTube, on XTube, on ThisVid, which I love, is at thisvid.com.
This is,
I adore. But you can see the best by porn on these sites, I mean, that people shooting themselves
yeah.
basically can create better movies than any porn studio of the 70s or 80s ever did. And they make eye contact because it's about them and the camera, and they know they're aware they're speaking to their audience. And just as I speak to my audience in Drummer or in my books or in my articles, I want my videos to speak to the viewer, so that sex magic, that SM, can happen, that actually changes magically a part of a man's body so that he goes into an ecstasy and engages whatever reality or fantasy he wants to confront, that he adores or that he's afraid of, but he wants to deal with in a counterphobic way by having some top who threatens him, but he knows it's a safe threat. So you can have your ultimate leather top telling you he's going to do all these kinds of things to you, but A, he can't get at you to do that because he's behind the screen, and he can't give you AIDS because he's behind glass, but you
Right.
can
I was going
still
to
get
say,
off on
it's almost like the screen has become the condom, hasn't it? You know?
precisely.
Yeah. It's so this, I mean, and you made how many, over 100 videos, and people would write in and this is my fantasy. I'd like to act it out with so and so or with whatever or in specific
Right.
location or
Yeah.
scenario. And so
Yeah,
although they look like amateurish in the sense that it's fun and it's you guys doing it, were they quite highly produced in a way?
were they what?
Were they kind of highly, were they produced? How were they produced? I mean, would you spend sort of weeks discussing what these people want, or would you kind of get an impression and put it together? Were they quite highly produced?
Well, they're subtly produced. It's very subtle, the production of it. We wanted to keep it simple because nobody ever jerked off to fancy camera work. And also, I found that watching movies like cult movies or other films by Chi LaRue, if I wanted to watch a movie, there might be a hot scene or a hot guy, but the look was only on screen for a flash.
Yeah, sometimes
So,
you'd only get like 3 minutes of a really hot moment, a hot guy or something,
right.
then it's
And you'd
over.
have to freeze. Yeah, and you'd have to freeze him so you could enjoy him with your hand and your eyeballs. And I thought, instead of causing that, I'll keep the camera on the guy so you never have to freeze frame it unless there's a particularly really divine moment that you see. But he'll always be looking at you. So the camera shot takes are long, and the camera angles only change if they add heat to the person acting into the camera. Um, my videos are such that they're not dick centric. They all end up with people coming and jerking off and all that. It's about that, but it's also about the person himself, the man himself, uh, doing what his fantasy is. Now, you ask me, how did I find out? People would contact me and they'd send a picture and they say, I'm into this, this, and this. And then I talk to them on the phone and we decide what they were going to do. And then when they'd come, we would spend usually a day with them before we would shoot them to get all the urgency of the rush of city vibes so we could calm them down and get the fake plastic sex beast from the street off of them and turn them more into themselves so that during the shoot, we could peel them like an onion and more of their persona would come through so that the viewer got more and more intimate with this person who was becoming more intimate with the viewer. And it really worked. It was a kind of eyeball magic that was transfixing and it worked. But
And so
because we were
different,
peeling it like
yeah, go ahead. I just so different from what else, the other things that were coming out in terms of pornography.
recording, but I can't hear you.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Can you
It's
hear me?
yeah, yeah, I can hear you now. It's just a little bit confusing. I'm sorry, I'm such a novice with Zoom, but I'm used to FaceTime, on my little phone, but it's rubbish to do. Sorry, not FaceTime, whatever it is. For the Facebook thing that I thought would be fun for people, our viewers to look at, your viewers mostly, I couldn't do it on the mobile because well, it won't let me. I can't remember, but that's the reason. There was some technical thing. But anyway, hooray! It wouldn't let us join last time, so we get another shot, Jack. What were we
If
talking
we just
about?
keep on keeping on.
That's it. Well, it's a thrill to chat to you after so many years with, and knowing you online. And, I'm really interested by this period of, you were talking about the scenarios, the fantasies that people played out in the Palm Drive videos that you and Mark Hemry produced in the early
Mhm.
80s starting. So there's this very important period where people were moving, as you have expressed, moving some of them back to their small towns or out of the cities, away from this kind of uncertainty that was
Right.
before things became more,
They quarantined
yeah,
themselves.
right. It's
And
kind of
so for
enforcing
people in that and for people in AIDS quarantine back then, that came long before this COVID quarantine that still kind of goes on. Uh, we were the USO that entertained the AIDS troops during the AIDS crisis until everybody acclimated to how each one and the health establishment was going to act, told us what to do to survive this.
And it,
And
it took
so,
it took them quite a long time, didn't it, to get their act together? Let's face it. And still in many parts of the world, I think there, for the grace of God, I've been very lucky with modern medication and with health support.
mhm,
But of course, there's an awful lot of stigma out there that needs to be challenged. It's almost an everyday thing, it feels like sometimes.
mhm.
And but I can't imagine what it must be like living in a country or a society where, access to medication is so difficult and to support. which is why some of the big organizations like Elton John's organization, AMFAR, do such great grassroots work with a
Hmm.
lot of these communities. And living in a big city now is like a lifesaver for somebody, for a small town boy like me from Yorkshire, you know? So it's kind of it's reverse things in a
You're a
way.
Yorkshire lad.
I am a Yorkshire lad originally, yeah. East Yorkshire, the wilds of the Humber Estuary, a place called Goole, would you believe?
Ghoul, ghoul.
Um, Not Gruel, but Goole, like the spook, but a place near there, Howden. And
The
you
man from Ghoul.
right, yeah, thank you. Happy Halloween to you too.
Thank you.
But so this period was, and as medication became better, and let's talk maybe a little bit about the San Francisco years, the drummer years that were not necessarily about the magazine. We've spoken a little bit about that and some of your other contributors. Uh, Harvey Milk, what was he like? I'm always fascinated by. I love Sean Penn's Oscar-winning performance. And talking of the Oscars, but I really, there were pictures of you on marches, and it was more to do with civil rights, wasn't it? Gay rights than it was to do with what would become this sort of force field of ACT UP.
Yes. Well, funny you should mention the movie Milk because Mark and I felt we had a responsibility when they needed crowd scenes. We went into the city and joined in two crowd scenes. One was the midnight march down Market Street,
Oh
and the
yeah.
other was the scene in front of where Sean Penn gives his address to the crowds. If you look to the right of the screen, you might see sort of in the front row.
Oh
And
great.
they did three takes. Sean Penn did that three times while we all cheered and carried on like the movie extras we were supposed to be. And but the night before was very interesting when we all were in this, a couple thousand people had lined up in the streets with the Van Sant's movie lights and cameras and everything all set up. And some of the producers were and people working on the film were walking around, and the producer asked a question: "How many people here tonight were in the original march?" And about 100 of us, maybe 200 of us, raised our hands, and some of us closed in around him to hear what he was asking and what he had to say. And so we talked about what he wanted to know what it was like that night, the same question you had just asked. And we told him that what they had planned with drummers going down the street, banging their drums and people yelling and screaming and carrying signs, he said, none of that ever happened. It was people who had spontaneously come out of their apartments. Nobody was ready to go with this. Nobody had a sign. Nobody carried out with a drum corps. It was people walking along with candles in a
Oh,
silent march. And the silence of it was what made it so solemn and so brilliant.
it was
And
like a
that's the
vigil. Like
yes,
a
and that's the way that Van Sant shot it. So we all were backed up Market Street toward Castro and given a start point, and we started kind of walk shuffling our way down Market Street, where different cameras were set up with some of the actors in the film standing next to them, so they'd be included in the shot as we mass crowd walked by. So that was kind of fun and weird to do, to be able to reenact your past in that way, uh, because it brought back the 70s, which has been the 70s was my golden decade. I mean, if you ever had to pick a golden decade for your life when you sowed your wild oats and everything was coming up roses and all those other cliches, it was the 1970s from,
yeah, wow,
you know,
really.
like 1965 to 1981. And so San Francisco was a wonderful place long before Harvey Milk showed up. And he was one of those New Yorkers who, in a sense, couldn't make it there and came to make it here because in a smaller town, a fishing village on a peninsula, rather than a Manhattan island of insular groups that would squeeze you out as gatekeepers, he found he could make his way. Uh, as a merchant, as a businessman, and then as a politician, because he saw the unmobilized forces of all these men in the streets. And while he had the camera shop, which was the town pump, where people would go and begin and get their film developed, because before that there was only one camera shop in the Castro that would develop gay film, whether it was nudity or just people at a Thanksgiving dinner. And Harvey, when he moved in, drove that filmmaker or that uh, straight uh, camera shop out of business, because all the gay business went to Harvey. And he was kind of controversial. I know I'm not speaking to the choir here, but he was controversial because we used to sit in the Castro Cafe right near the Star Pharmacy. And sometimes you'd see him walking by the windows, holding court in various places. And the little Algonquin club sitting in the Castro Cafe used to kind of giggle and laugh at his obvious way of pressing the flesh and working the crowds. That was his mobilizing, but from snotty people sitting in a cafe drinking coffee on a gay afternoon in 1972 or three, you know, there was cause for camp comments. And Don Levine from New York, who was a cabaret singer, couldn't make it in New York and wanted to make it in San Francisco, one day sitting in the Castro Cafe, called Harvey Milk the mayor of Castro Street. But you'd have to put that in quotation marks and spin it, because it was a not nice comment. Like, who does she think she is, the mayor of Castro Street?
So he was already turning a few noses up, but was he very naturally charismatic? Was he kind of a natural leader, do you think? Anyway, or was he kind of ambitious and,
Well, I never hold anybody's ambition against him. That was
oh
fine.
no, yeah.
And I think he did great in coming in and starting up a business. I mean, he was a brave man. He came, started his business up, and then saw that he could start up politics. But like John O'Hara's character, Harvey Milk had an appointment in Samara. And when he came here, it sealed his doom. If I were a Greek playwright doing Harvey Milk, I would have him come here and have him hoist on his own petard. He was not that popular. When the first Castro Street Fair occurred, he started it, and he gets great credit for that. But he wasn't well thought of by the city government because they refused to cut the traffic off. They stopped the traffic on Castro Street for the fair, but they would not stop the traffic on the cross street 18th Street. And so there was a mess of traffic with all these 5,000 people at this first street fair. And he did not get the respect that allowed him to make that place safe, because that created a traffic jam of people and cars that was a problem. Because at that first street fair, David Sparrow, my lover at that time, and I were walking down the street toward the intersection of 18th and Castro, and we heard a gunshot go off. And people started to scream and scatter, but there was no place to run because cars were stuck in the intersection, surrounded by thousands of people. Nobody could move anywhere. You couldn't run anywhere. And then the gunman came wearing a long kind of like herdsman coat, a rancher's coat, and he had a shotgun. And the shotgun was waving around, and it went off again, and it shot the wall of the Hibernia Bank. And then that fell down and wounded a couple of women in the crowd. And at that point, David Sparrow and I were knocked down to the cement by a cop who pushed through us and knocked us down and went running toward the gunman. Well, we were so close to the whole thing that when the gunman, still waving his gun around, came into farther and made his way through the crowd, which parted for him, and he came toward closer into the intersection, his back went across a hood of a car, and the cop went up and pinioned him down. And this is just a few feet from us. He was moving, the gunman was moving toward us, and the cop shot him in the chest with his 357 Magnum and killed him.
So this was immediately after he'd shot, was it Dan White and Harvey Milk in the mayor's office.
Pardon me?
So this was immediately after he'd shot Harvey Milk in the mayor's office or in the
No, no,
town.
no, 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 no. This was
No,
5 years. This was year. Harvey Milk's career started the day he started the Castro Street Fair, which he
right.
started to register voters.
I apologize. I thought
But the sit,
this gunman was rushing from City Hall or something.
no,
Okay.
no, he was taking it. If he even knew that there was going to be a street fair that day, I don't know. But he got caught. The gunman got caught at the street fair, like the street fair goers got caught at the intersection where there were cars caught in the intersection because the city did not respect Milk enough to cut off all the traffic to make it safe. So it was an unsafe situation. 2 guns were shot. Several people were injured. Everybody was terrified. And 1 man was killed. And the next day, I mean, the next day on the cover, on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, I'm still upset on the San Francisco Chronicle, there was a picture of the medical workers and the dead body lying in the middle of the intersection of 18th and Castro, which nobody ever thinks about. And there am I standing with David Sparrow because all this happened in proximity to our feet. And we were transfixed and just kind of, it all happened so fast. And the cops that were there protecting us suddenly moved from just surveying the thing to being participants in a shooter's presence. And so Harvey Milk's career began with gunshots at the Castro Street Fair, and it ended with gunshots years later in City Hall.
Right.
So his political career was bookended by guns in San Francisco. And that was a San Franciscan, a homophobic San Francisco man who had been a policeman and a fireman who shot Milk. So that led to all kinds of complications. But Harvey Milk was quite the character on the streets. He was liked and beloved, but he was thought, to be amusing, and people made a camp of him. But he was who he was, and fully that. And you had to appreciate him for that. I don't mean to denigrate him or anything. He couldn't have known that there was going to be a shooter there. This was years before all these shootings began across America.
Yeah.
But guns have always been around. But no, he was never a god walking down Castro Street. He didn't become mythic until he was shot in his office. And then he went from being a neighborhood person into being a gay saint. And he did all the things he should have done politically. He did very well, but in a sense, he was only accidentally the supervisor because he won, as I understand it, because the neighborhoods in San Francisco, the voting districts had been all mixed up and remastered, kind of gerrymandered perhaps, to reflect different voting groups. And the way the new groups went together allowed him to win. If they had not gone together, he would not have won. But it was like the Republicans doing what they're doing now in order to change the vote by not allowing certain people to vote in this district, but in that, because they'll have less impact if they go over there. So Harvey was the beneficiary of that change in the city. So it was like
So
going to a play.
sometimes it can work for the underdog then, can't it? This idea that, you position yourself in the right position, you're gonna win because, it's just about figures and placement. But it's
Right.
almost like democracy has become so undemocratic, there's always call here for proportional representation by people like Peter Tatchell. But,
Mm-hmm.
what this election showed us, Jack, was that millions of people voted for a kind of essentially a far right party, Reform UK.
Yeah.
And, it shows that there are a lot of frustrated people out there that are so disillusioned with Democrats, Republicans, Tories, Labour,
Mm-hmm.
that there's this kind of, I think a lot of people are sick of this, as if we have to be black and white with everything. There has to be a polar opposite. There can't be some middle ground or something that's kind of collaborative and collective to save ourselves, save the planet. and have a good old time whilst we're doing it. There
Hmm.
seems to be, it's like the old oil barons are still hanging on, aren't they? And we're seeing that play out itself yet again. But
Well,
enough
people seem
about
to.
lubrication. Let's talk about something else. What should we talk about now? We've spoken a little bit. I'm really interested in some of these people that you collaborated with, but I'd like to talk a little bit about, and I wish I could pop some pictures up to show people, but some of the photography that you did during Drummer and Palm Drive, because you were a contributor too to the magazine. But
Hmm.
when did photography really start to emerge with you, Jack? Was it very early on?
When I was 14, I began taking pictures. I used my mother was a photographer and she had a box camera from her girlhood, and she allowed me to use her camera, which was fairly new then because my mother was only 19 years older than I am. So that camera was kind of new technology, even when I used that little box camera with its big rolls of film. But basically, I mean, yes, I shot snapshots the way everybody did, but also uh, I would go out and I would arrange my friends and my cousins in a certain way so they'd all be posed in a certain way so that when the picture I would take would then have a certain composition. So at 14, I was already directing people inside the still frame of a camera. And in 1957, I took up shooting 8 millimeter videos, 8 millimeter films in an 8 millimeter camera, and learning how to edit in the camera because I didn't like sitting with a little editing machine trying to glue little tiny pieces of 8 millimeter film together to get rid of the bad footage. So I would just count while I was shooting and take the close-ups and the insert shots and the long shots and mix them while I was shooting, and use my father's editing equipment to make those films. In fact, one of those films just recently ended up in Todd Vero's uh, new feature film called uh, Forgetting the Remembering the 70s or something like that. Anyway, it's Todd Vero in a 70s movie. I'm sorry, Todd. But uh, he needed an opening shot of New York in the 70s. And I had a huge demonstration that I shot in the streets of New York in 1970 as everybody was getting out against Vietnam and the bombing in Cambodia. But this was 1970, get this, right after Stonewall. And this was the first appearance of the Gay Liberation Front at a public event. And they had their big uh, banner that held between two poles. And while I'm filming the crowd, I stop on that and include that and move it all around. So it helped tie it in to Todd's movie
Oh,
as the
fantastic.
opening shot
I'll look out
over
for it.
which
Yeah.
the credits roll. So those that graphic interest that I had allowed me in high school to be the high school photographer. And of course, the yearbook. I mean, when we had to do a yearbook, everybody just turned and pointed at me. I mean, they didn't even vote on because nobody else wanted to do it. Nobody else knew how to write. I mean, we were 17 years old. Everybody else was playing basketball and football, and I was the only one that was writing and pasting up pictures and knew how to do a layout. And
So
so I was
the early forms of publishing are kind of in your school years, right?
yeah, and I was also hired by the school paper, which was a national paper. I worked with that as an editor for a number of years, writing and reviewing and shooting photographs for them. So it was quite natural for me one of the great things I liked about coming out was suddenly all these people, all these wonderful men were available for pictures. And so, I thought, why not? This moment's going to evaporate. I mean, even long before AIDS, even in 1968, I was thinking, this is too good to last. I mean, either I'll outgrow it or it will all end. So right from the beginning, I was taking pictures to mark these moments, to have these moments to remember.
Mm.
So that all led to my photography, and if somebody wanted to see a cross array of my photography, they could find it in a London book. It was published by GMP, Gaiman's Press London, in 1994, called Jack Fritscher's American Men. And in there, it's a coffee table photo book, and there's 55 of my photographs in there. Unfortunately, they had budget problems, so the color did not show up. They printed them all in black and white. So one day another book will come out with them all in color.
That sounds fantastic. And I don't know whether Gay Men's Press, I'm familiar with it because it was how, it was the publishing house that published a lot of material in the 70s and 80s. So I would get to know it in the 80s and 90s as I was
Mhm.
growing up, I think. I mean, it might be a case that I have to go and have a nice chat with the guy at Gay's the Word bookshop.
Yeah, Lenny,
They, they,
Yuli,
right.
Yuli
No,
Leonard,
okay. Well,
Yuli Leonard.
I'll ask for him and, see if they can do some digging around. It'd be great to see a copy of it.
Hmm.
It'd probably be in the British Library, which is only down the road from me. I should go to the British Library and say, bring out your Jack Frischners.
There's no N in my name.
No, no what?
No N in my name. It rhymes with richer and
Richard.
bitcher.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't ask for
There-
that then.
there's no N in it. It's just
Did I pronounce it in a funny English way? I'll put my teeth in, Jack. Don't worry.
not to correct you, but if anybody wants to Google, my name is hard enough to spell because it has a number of consonants in a row in the middle
Listen, I'm
with the T.
dyslexic. Why do you think I'm a photographer? I'm completely dyslexic. I'm gay and dyslexic. There are very few things that I thought I could turn to, and thankfully, photography, images, making pretty pictures, and sometimes
Well,
not so pretty pictures.
well, we'd
You
work
know.
well together because I'm the opposite of dyslexic. I'm a writer who's a proofreader, so I'm always constantly looking for the the little typos. So
Yeah.
not to say anything to you, but that's a lot of people have difficulty pronouncing it.